A boot kicked the barn door open and snow blasted through the gap. Wind screamed across the empty stalls. A man stepped inside, big, wrapped in leather, ice crusted in his beard. Behind him came more of them, engines dying in the dark, boots crunching frozen hay. Something moved in the far corner, a low growl. Then a dog, old, gray-muzzled, half-starved, dragged itself up to stand between the men and a shape buried in the straw. The shape was a woman, young, swollen belly, lips gone blue. She lifted her head and her eyes found the biggest man in the room. She should have screamed. She didn't. She whispered a name. His name. A name only one dead man had ever called him. Dutch Kowalski stopped breathing. How did a freezing stranger know the words that a fallen brother took to his grave? Stay with me on this one. Let me back up because you need to understand how 10 men on motorcycles ended up in that barn in the first place. They'd been riding since noon. 10 bikes strung out along a 2-lane highway in eastern Montana, heading nowhere in particular, which was the way they liked it. It was Christmas Eve. Most of them didn't have anyone waiting, and the ones who did had stopped being welcome a long time ago. So they rode. That was the family. That was the whole thing. The man out front was Dutch Kowalski, road captain, pushing 50, built like a man who'd done hard work his whole life, with a scar that ran from his left ear down under his collar. Nobody asked about the scar. Dutch didn't offer. He wore a beat-up leather jacket, and under it, against his chest, a set of army dog tags on a steel chain. He never took them off. Not to sleep, not to shower, not for anything. The other men had learned not to reach for them, not even as a joke. There were parts of Dutch you left alone, and that chain was one of them. The weather turned on them fast. One minute it was gray and cold. The next it was a whiteout. You couldn't see the bike in front of you. The wind came screaming down off the high plains and the snow went sideways, and the temperature dropped so hard it felt like the air itself had teeth. Believe me, men have died in less than that. Dutch knew they couldn't keep riding. A man goes numb, he stops feeling the road, and then he's just meat on a machine going 70 into a ditch. So when he saw the shape of a building off the highway, a big old dairy barn, half collapsed, the paint long gone, he raised his fist and slowed the pack and led them off the road through a foot of fresh powder. One man rode close to his shoulder, and he mattered more than the rest. His name was Cyrus, though everybody called him Doc. Doc had been a combat medic once, in a war he never talked about. He was quiet, thin, older than his years. When the club got hurt, Doc was the one who patched them. Broken hands, road rash, a knife wound once outside a bar in Billings. Doc fixed all of it and never charged a thing but a beer. He squinted into the storm now, and he was the first to say it out loud. "Somebody's here," Doc said. "There's tracks fresh." Dutch saw them too. Small boot prints in the snow, half-filled, leading up to the barn door, too small for a man. And beside them the marks of a dog. That's when Dutch kicked the door open. And that brings us right back to where we started. The dog, the growl, the woman in the hay, and that whisper that stopped Dutch cold. She was maybe 22, 23, dark hair matted to her face. A wool coat 2 sizes too big wrapped around her, and under it she was enormous with child 8 months along, maybe more. Her lips were blue and her whole body shook in long, hard waves. The old collie stood in front of her, teeth bared, but the dog was so weak it could barely hold up its own head. It was guarding her with the last of what it had. The men filled the doorway, big and silent and dark, and any sane woman in that spot would have been terrified. 10 Hell's Angels stepping out of a blizzard into the place where you're hiding. But she looked up at Dutch, and something in her face was almost relief, like she'd been waiting. "Cold," she got out through chattering teeth. "The baby, I can't stop shaking." Doc was already moving. He crossed the barn in 3 steps and dropped to his knees beside her, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. "Hypothermia," he said. "She's been out here for hours. We need heat. Now." or we lose her and the kid both." The men didn't wait to be told twice. This is the part people never expect from bikers, so pay attention. They moved like a crew that had done this before. Two of them ripped apart a rotten stall for dry wood. Another kicked a rusted feed trough into the middle of the floor to build the fire in. One dug a bedroll out of his saddlebag. Nobody argued. Nobody hung back. Whatever these men were to the rest of the world, in that barn they were something else entirely. And that was the stakes right there. A pregnant woman freezing to death on Christmas night, miles from the nearest town, in a storm that would kill anyone who tried to drive it. No phone, no doctor, no time, just 10 outlaws and a dying fire and a clock running down. Dutch knelt in front of her. He pulled the dog tags out from under his shirt without thinking, leaning in to check her eyes the way Doc had shown him years ago. And the woman's gaze dropped to that chain, to the two small metal tags swinging in the firelight. She reached up with a shaking hand and caught them and turned them so she could read the name stamped into the steel. Her whole face changed. "Preacher," she whispered. Dutch went rigid. Nobody in that club had ever called him Preacher. Nobody living knew that name. There had been exactly one man in the whole world who called him that, and that man had been dead for 6 years. And Dutch had carried his dog tags around his neck every single day since. "What did you say?" His voice came out rough. "He said," she swallowed hard, fighting the cold to get the words out. "He said if I was ever in real trouble and there was nobody left, find the man called Dutch, the one they made a preacher out of. He said you owed him. He said you'd come." Dutch stared at the name on the tags in her hand. The name wasn't his. It was Callehans, and it hit him all at once, like a fist to the chest. "Sam," he said, "you're Sam Callahan's wife." She started to cry. "Ruth," she said, "I'm Ruth. And Sam's gone, and it's just me and the baby now, and I've got nowhere. I've got nobody." Now here's the thing you have to understand about Sam Callahan. 6 years back, in a rice paddy on the other side of the world, Dutch Kowalski had been pinned down and bleeding out with a bullet in his shoulder and no way out. The man who came back for him, through open fire, when every rule of sense said stay put, was Sam Callahan. Sam dragged him 200 yards to cover. Sam kept him alive till the choppers came. And 2 weeks later, on another muddy hill, Sam took the round meant for the whole squad and didn't get up again. Before that, in the long, boring nights when there was nothing to do but talk, Sam used to rag on Dutch for quoting scripture his mother taught him. "There he goes," Sam would say. "The preacher's at it again." It was a joke between two scared young men. Nobody else ever heard it. Sam would grin in the dark and say one day the war would end and they'd both go home and Dutch could preach at his wedding. Neither one of those things happened the way they said. And when Sam died, Dutch took his tags off his cold neck and swore an oath that if Sam ever had people, Dutch would stand for them, whatever it took. He'd carried that oath for 6 years and never once had the chance to keep it. Now the chance was lying in the hay in front of him, blue-lipped and pregnant and out of time. Dutch pulled his own jacket off and wrapped it around her. Then he pulled off his sweater and did the same. The other men saw it and started stripping their own coats without a word, piling leather and wool around this stranger until she was buried in it. Doc got the fire roaring and dragged her close to the heat. Someone poured hot coffee from a thermos and held it to her lips. The old collie, Juno, crawled in against her side, and this time nobody pushed the dog away. Slowly the shaking eased. Her color came back a little. She stopped chattering. Her eyes cleared. "There," Doc said quietly, sitting back on his heels. "There she comes, heartbeat steadier. Baby's still kicking, feel that. She's a fighter, this one." For the first time in an hour, Dutch let out a breath. The men settled around the fire. One of them cracked a small smile. Ruth's eyes drifted half-closed, warm at last, Juno's head on her lap, the storm shut outside the walls where it belonged. It was Christmas night. They had a fire, they had the woman alive. Against every odd, the worst of it seemed behind them. Dutch rested one big hand on the top of the old dog's head. He almost believed it was over. It wasn't, not even close. If you're still with me, take 1 second and hit that subscribe button. Because what happened in that barn over the next few hours is the reason grown men still can't tell this story without stopping to breathe. Now. Ruth's hand shot out and grabbed Dutch's wrist so hard her nails dug in. Her whole body arched off the ground and a sound tore out of her that wasn't a cry of cold. It was pain. Deep, ripping pain. "It's coming," she gasped. "The baby, it's coming now." Doc was back at her side in an instant, and I watched his face change, and let me tell you, that scared me more than anything. Because Doc didn't scare. Doc had seen everything. But when he pulled back the coats and put his hands on her, something in his eyes went tight and grim. "This is wrong," he said low, so only Dutch could hear. "The baby's turned, it's coming backward, breech." He looked up. "And she's bleeding, Dutch, more than she should be." And just like that, everything changed. See, up until that second, they'd been fighting the cold. The cold was an enemy they understood. You build a fire, you pile on coats, you win. But this was something else. A young mother hemorrhaging on a dirt floor with a baby stuck sideways inside her. No hospital, no doctor, but a man whose hands had been shaking since a war he never got over, and a blizzard outside that had already swallowed the only road to help. The fight wasn't against the weather anymore. It was against death itself, and death had walked right into the barn and sat down by the fire. "We've got to get her to a hospital," one of the men said. "Miles City can't be more than 20 miles. "In this," Doc snapped, "there's 3-foot drifts on that highway. You'd never make it out of the lot, and if you did, she'd be dead before the county line. Nobody's driving through this. Nobody's flying. We are it. Whatever happens in the next hour, it happens right here with us, or it doesn't happen at all." The barn went dead quiet, just the fire and the wind and Ruth's ragged breathing. One of the younger men, a kid they called Rabbit, hauled the door open a foot just to check, and the storm hit him in the face like a wall, and he shoved it shut again without a word. That was the answer. There was no help coming. There was no help anywhere. Dutch looked at Doc. "Then you deliver it." And here's where the second problem hit. Doc's hands came up in front of him and they were trembling. Not a little, bad. He stared at them like they belonged to somebody else. "6 years ago I had a man bleeding out under my hands," Doc said, and his voice cracked. I froze, Dutch, and he died, and I have not put my hands inside a dying person since. If I try and I lock up again, she dies. The baby dies. I can't carry another one. I can't." There it was. The one man who could save her couldn't make himself do it. Ruth screamed again, and there was blood on the straw now, dark in the firelight. The old collie whined and pressed close. Time was running out by the second, and I want you to sit with how bad this was. Nobody could ride for help. Nobody could carry her out. The only road left ran straight through a broken man's 2 shaking hands, and he was telling them that road was closed. Dutch grabbed Doc by the collar. He didn't shake him. He didn't yell. He got right up in his face, close and quiet, the way he used to talk men off the edge in the war. "Listen to me," Dutch said. "That man you lost, you didn't kill him, the war killed him. But this one's not dead yet. This one's got a chance, and the only chance she's got is you. Sam Callahan came back for me when it made no sense. He reached into fire he had no business reaching into. And you're gonna do the same thing now because his wife and his kid are lying on that floor and there is nobody else. You hear me, Doc? There is nobody else." Doc stared at him. His hands were still shaking. For a long second I thought we'd lost him. I thought he'd fold up right there, and we'd all have to watch a woman die because a good man couldn't get past the worst day of his life. And then Ruth grabbed his forearm, sweat pouring off her, and looked him in the eye and said, "Please, please don't let my baby die. Sam wouldn't have, please." Something broke loose in the old medic's face. He closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, they were clear. He looked down at his hands, and slow, one finger at a time, they went still. "All right," he said, "all right. Then everybody does exactly what I say." What happened over the next hour, I'm going to tell you straight, because it deserves to be told straight. Doc took command like the soldier he'd once been. He barked orders and the bikers jumped. He needed clean cloth. They tore up the cleanest shirts they had and warmed them by the fire. He needed light. 3 men held lanterns and flashlights in a tight ring. He needed hot water. Someone melted snow in a metal pail over the flames. He needed the floor clean. They cleared the straw and laid down bedrolls and coats. Whatever he called for appeared in his hands before he finished the sentence. 10 men who answered to no law on earth, taking orders from a whisper, because the whisper knew how to save her and they didn't. "Ruth," Doc said, kneeling between her knees, his voice a rock now. "The baby's coming feet first. That's harder, but women have been doing it since the start of time, and you are going to do it too. When I tell you to push, you push with everything you have. When I tell you to stop, you stop, even if every part of you is screaming to keep going. Can you do that?" She nodded, teeth clenched. Dutch got down behind her and let her lean back against his chest. He took both her hands in his. "I've got you," he said. "Sam's holding on right through me. You're not alone, you hear me? You are not alone." And then it started. I won't pretend it was clean or gentle, because it wasn't. It was the hardest, bloodiest, most desperate thing any man in that barn had ever seen. Ruth pushed until her voice gave out. Doc worked with his warmed hands, talking the whole time, low and constant, guiding the little body out into the freezing world 1 impossible inch at a time. The feet came. Then the legs. Every man in that ring leaned in, breath held. And then Doc's whole face went white, because the cord was wrapped, and the baby's head was still inside. And this was the moment, the exact moment, where mother and child both live or both die. "Stop pushing," Doc said. "Ruth, stop right now." She stopped. God knows how, but she stopped. Doc slid 2 fingers up alongside the baby's neck, found the cord, and eased it loose with a gentleness that did not match his shaking, cursing panic of an hour before. Sweat ran down his nose and dripped onto his wrists. The men held the lanterns so still their arms burned. Nobody breathed. In that one stretch of seconds, the whole barn hung on the tips of an old medic's 2 fingers, and those fingers, the ones that had failed a dying man 6 years back, did not fail this time. "Now," Doc said, "one more, Ruth, the biggest one of your life." "Now." Ruth threw her head back against Dutch's chest and pushed with everything she had left, a sound coming out of her that I will hear until the day I die, and Dutch held her and said her husband's name over and over like a prayer, and the baby came free into Doc's waiting hands. And then nothing. The baby didn't cry. It hung there in Doc's palms, small and gray and still, and the whole barn seemed to stop. Ruth lifted her head. "Why isn't it crying?" she said. "Why isn't my baby crying?" Doc flipped the tiny thing over onto his forearm and rubbed its back hard with 2 fingers, fast, rough, urgent. Once, twice. He cleared its mouth. He bent and breathed the smallest breath into its face. Nothing. He did it again. "Come on," he was saying under his breath, "come on, come on." And I swear the temperature in that barn dropped 10 degrees, because every man in there had just watched them fight through hell to get this child out. And now it lay there gray and silent, and the fight looked like it had been for nothing. Dutch's hand tightened around Ruth's. He could feel the fight going out of her. He could feel her starting to break. And then that baby coughed. It coughed and it sputtered and it dragged in one huge shuddering breath, and then it let out a cry, a furious, ringing, red-faced newborn wail that bounced off every wall of that old barn and filled it up to the rafters. Alive, screaming and pink and alive. The men lost it. 10 hardened outlaws, and I watched every one of them turn away and wipe his eyes. One of them just sat down flat on the floor like his legs quit. Somebody laughed and it came out half a sob. Doc bowed his head over the child and his shoulders shook, and this time it wasn't fear that was shaking him. "It's a boy," Doc said, laughing and crying at once. "Ruth, it's a boy. You've got a son, and he has got a set of lungs on him." He wrapped the baby in a warm shirt and laid him on Ruth's chest, and she folded her arms around him and pressed her lips to his little head and just sobbed, rocking him, saying thank you, thank you, thank you, over and over to a barn full of men she'd been terrified of 2 hours before. Dutch still had his arms around her from behind. He looked down at the tiny face against her chest, this brand new person who almost didn't make it, Sam Callahan's son, born on Christmas night in a dying barn to a bunch of Hell's Angels who happened to ride in out of a storm. And the debt he'd carried for 6 years, the oath he swore over a dead man's dog tags on a muddy hill, he'd finally paid it. The bleeding slowed. Doc worked over Ruth a while longer, and when he finally sat back, he nodded at Dutch. "She's gonna make it," he said quietly. "Both of them. She's weak, she needs a real doctor come morning, but the danger's past. They're gonna make it, Dutch." By the time the sky started to go gray, the storm had blown itself out. That's how these things always seem to go. The worst of it comes in the dark, and then the dawn just shows up like nothing happened. The wind died to nothing. The snow stopped, and through the gaps in the old barn boards came the first thin light of Christmas morning, pale and clean, spilling across the straw. Ruth was asleep by the fire, the baby tucked warm against her, the old collie curled at her feet with one eye open, still on guard even now. The men had settled into a rough circle, dozing, keeping the fire fed in shifts without anyone telling them to. Dutch hadn't slept. He sat with his back against a post and watched them breathe. When the light was strong enough to ride by, 2 of the men took a bike out to check the road. They came back an hour later. The plows had been through on the highway. It was passable barely. Miles City was open. There was a small hospital there. So they made a plan, the way the club made every plan, fast and together. They couldn't put a newborn and a half-frozen mother on the back of a motorcycle in that cold. But one of the men remembered passing a farmhouse a few miles back with a truck in the yard. Dutch rode out himself, knocked on the door of a startled old rancher, and offered him every dollar in the club's pockets to borrow that truck for a day. The old man took one look at Dutch's face, waved off the money, and handed him the keys. "It's Christmas," the rancher said. "Bring it back when you can." They laid Ruth and the baby across the bench seat, wrapped in every coat the club owned. Juno rode in the footwell. Doc sat in the middle, keeping watch on both his patients, and Dutch drove, slow and careful, the whole pack of motorcycles rolling ahead and behind through the fresh snow like an honor guard. 10 outlaw bikes and a borrowed farm truck, carrying a widow and her Christmas son into town. At the little hospital in Miles City, the nurses came running out at the sight of them, and there was some fuss, the way there always is when a crowd of Hell's Angels shows up anywhere. But Doc walked in and rattled off everything he'd done, every step of it, calm and clinical, and the young doctor on duty listened with his mouth slightly open and finally said, "You delivered a breech with a nuchal cord in a barn, in a blizzard, and they both lived." Doc just shrugged. The doctor shook his head. "Son of a gun," he said, "Merry Christmas." They kept Ruth for 3 days. The club stayed the whole time. They rented rooms at a motel that didn't want them and paid double for the trouble. They took turns sitting in the hospital hallway so Ruth never woke up alone. They pooled their cash and bought a crib, a car seat, and a month of groceries, and left it all on the porch of the little rented house where Ruth had been living since Sam died. The house she'd been about to lose, which was why she'd been out on that road in the first place, driving to her sister's 2 counties over when her old car slid off into a ditch and left her walking through the snow until she found that barn. She told Dutch the whole story on the second day, sitting up in bed with the baby in her arms. How Sam came home from the war changed and quiet. How they married anyway and were happy mostly. How the cancer took him fast, 18 months back, the kind the men who were over there kept getting. How she found out she was pregnant 2 weeks after the funeral. How the money ran out, and then the last of it ran out, and she had nowhere to go but a sister who barely had room. How Sam, near the end, had held her hand and told her about a man called the preacher, a man he'd saved once, a man who owed him and would pay if it ever came to that. "I never really believed it," Ruth said. "I thought it was just something he said. And then that door opened, and there you were." Dutch didn't say much. He wasn't a man of many words, but before they left town, he did 2 things. The first was he reached up and pulled the dog tags off over his head, Sam's tags, the ones he'd worn every day for 6 years through everything. He'd told himself he'd never take them off, but he leaned over the crib and tucked them gently into the blanket beside the sleeping baby's hand, so the tiny fingers closed around the warm steel. "These are yours now, little man," he said. "They were your daddy's. He was the best of us. You carry his name and you carry these, and one day when you're big enough your mama's gonna tell you what kind of man he was. And if you're ever in trouble and there's nobody left, you find me." Same as he told her, "You find me and I'll come. That's a promise, and in my family we don't break those." Ruth named the baby Samuel. Samuel Noel Callahan. Noel for the night he was born. The second thing Dutch did, he didn't tell Ruth about right away. The club had a lawyer, a real one, an old member who'd gone straight and hung a shingle. Dutch called him from a payphone in the motel lobby and set up a fund, everything the club could spare and more coming every month, for the boy's raising, for his schooling someday. Quiet money, no strings. Ruth found out about it years later when the checks kept coming and she finally tracked down where they came from, and by then it was too late to argue. They came back too. That's the part that gets me. It wasn't a one-night thing, some grand gesture and gone. Every Christmas after that, for as long as Dutch lived, that same pack of motorcycles came rumbling up the road to Ruth Callahan's house, loaded down with presents strapped to the sissy bars, and the neighbors would peek through their curtains at 10 aging outlaws playing Santa Claus for a fatherless boy. Samuel grew up with a whole barn's worth of uncles, hard men who'd have gone through a wall for him, and an old collie named Juno who lived 4 more good years, and a set of dog tags he kept on a nail above his bed. Dutch grew old. The scar faded, and so did he, the way road men do. But Ruth said that near the end, when he could barely ride anymore, he told her the truth of it. That he'd carried Sam's death like a stone for 6 years. That he'd hated himself for living when the better man died. That he'd waited and waited for a chance to make it mean something, and had just about given up believing it would ever come. And then a storm chased 10 tired men off a highway into a broken-down barn on Christmas night. And there she was. And there the boy was, waiting to be born. And the debt he thought he'd carry to his grave got handed back to him as a gift. "I always thought I'd have to do something huge to pay Sam back," Dutch told her. "Storm a hill, take a bullet, something big. Turned out all I had to do was open a door and keep a promise and not look away. So the next time you see a pack of them go by, the leather, the noise, the patches, all the things the world's taught you to be afraid of, just remember. You don't know what any one of those men is carrying under his jacket. You don't know whose life he saved, or whose debt he's waiting to pay, or what door he might open some cold night that changes everything. A boot kicked a barn door open in a blizzard, and death was already inside waiting. But so was mercy. And on that one Christmas night, in that one broken barn, mercy got there first. Tightened to roughly 4,990 words, inside the 4,805,200 window. The 150-word hook and the full ending are unchanged. I trimmed the setup context, Doc's ride-in, the diagnosis exchange, and the delivery narration by cutting doubled phrasing and a few restated beats, without dropping any story turn.